Rizal moved to Paris upon finishing his annotation of Antonio de Morga's Las Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, a book on the history of the Philippines. It was at this time when he became aware of the fact that there is quite a number of sources on the Philippines and Filipino culture which can be found in Acapulco, Mexico, and other countries in Europe, namely France, the United Kingdom, and Germany. He then sought to create a team that would synthesize all of the materials in order to educate Filipinos on their history and native culture. This team, organized by Blumentritt, Rosted himself, was to be called the International Association of Filipinologists. He wanted to assign Blumentritt as the organization's president, and Rizal himself would take the position as its secretary. The group's proposed premier agenda was the Philippines under Spanish rule before and after 1808. This plan, however, was not to be, as the French government decided to restrict the conferences that would be held at the Universal Exposition of 1889. Rizal and the Exposition of 1889. Rizal's arrival in Paris coincided with the aforementioned exposition, which is to be held in the said city. He went on to establish other organizations in Paris, like the Kidlat Club, in which expatriates like Gregorio Aguilera, Fernando Canon, Lauro de Mayuga, Julio Laurente, Guillermo Puatu, Baldomero Rojas, and the brothers Juan and Antonio Luna were members. This was then replaced by the Indios Bravos, an organization which was dedicated to showing foreigners that Indios are capable of excelling in intellectual and physical prowess. He also established the Sociedad RDLM, or Redención de los Malayos. Other activities and accomplishments in Paris. It was also in Paris wherein his annotation of Morga's Sucesos was published. Under the pseudonym de Mas Alang, he wrote Por Telefono, a satirical essay which was meant to address the comments of Father Font on Noli Me Tangere. He also thought of founding a modern college in Hong Kong for men who are of good family and financial means so that they may respond to the circumstances and needs of the modern times. Although Mariano Cunanan, a fellow Filipino in Paris, pledged 40,000 pesos for initial capital, it did not come into being. On top of all that, Rizal kept on writing articles for La Solidaridad. Here are two of the articles he wrote. Sobre la indolencia de los Filipinos. This was the longest essay he ever wrote. It ran from July 15 to September 15. Addressed the claims that Filipinos are inherently lazy. Rizal claimed that while Filipinos do have the tendency to become lazy, they were not born lazy. And this could be attributed to the country's tropical climate. The rich soil could provide for good crops, cutting the labor needed to ensure good produce. The Filipinos have also come to admire the European way of living with servants. Because pre-colonial Filipinos were noted for their industriousness, Rizal took the liberty to look at the causes of the Filipinos' laziness. He found that the Spaniards contributed to it. The following are the reasons why. 1. Wars and internal disorders that followed Spanish conquest. 2. Piratical attacks on coastal towns and villages by Muslim pirates. 3. Forced labor in shipbuilding. 4. Government's neglect and apathy to agriculture, industry, and commerce. 5. Absence of material and moral incentives to work harder. 6. The teaching of the Spanish missionaries that heaven is for the poor. 7. Too much government restriction and red tape in the approval of permit to transact business. 8. Encouragement and propagation of gambling. 9. Ownership of the big estates by the friars. 10. Examples set by the Spaniards in disdaining manual labor. And 11. The deprivation of human dignity. Rizal also noted that Filipinos were also at fault. 1. They had feelings of inferiority. 2. They placed hopes on miracles. 3. They lacked the spirit to pursue lofty purposes. And 4th, the lack of national sentiment. He closed the article with a somewhat positive note, saying that education and liberty are the keys for the Filipinos to get back on their feet. Filipinos Dentro de 100 Años. Running from September 30, 1889 to February 1, 1890, Filipinos Dentro 100 Años was a forecast of the Philippines in 100 years. This essay's goal was to remind the Spaniards of what caused the French and Spanish peoples to start an uprising in their respective countries. It started off with an analysis of what made the Filipinos miserable. The following were the identified causes. 1. Spain's implementation of her military policies. 2. Deterioration and disappearance of Filipino indigenous culture. And 3. Passivity and submissiveness to the Spanish colonizers. The Spaniards' acts of racism made the Filipinos realize that they are distinct people, and started an outbreak of uncoordinated and unsuccessful revolts. What then could the Spaniards do to keep the Filipinos under their power? They could not keep the Filipinos ignorant anymore. Keeping them on the poverty line has also stopped working, as they have managed to look at other ways to make a living. Annihilation of the race was not an option as well, because this would mean that Spain would lose manpower. Rizal's proposed solution for the colonizers was for them to revise their colonial policies in such a way that it would complement the Filipinos and their rising sense of nationalism. Rizal in Brussels. Because the lifestyle in Paris was becoming too expensive to maintain and the social scene was distracting him from completing El Filibusterismo, Rizal decided to move to Brussels with Jose Alberto and stayed with engineering student Jose Alejandrino when Alberto left. To make ends meet, he worked as a surgeon and did gymnastics and target practice to stay fit. He spent his time in the city finishing El Filibusterismo and writing articles for La Solidaridad. Here are some of the articles he wrote. A la defensa, to the defense. In response to Patricio de la Escurura's anti-Filipino work, published on April 30, 1889. La verdad para todos, the truth for all, written to defend the Filipinos against the Spaniards' claim that Filipino officials were unknowledgeable and unprincipled, published on May 31, 1889. Vicente Barantes Teatro Tagalog. Rizal wrote this article to expose Barantes' ignorance of the Tagalog dialect's theatrical art, published on June 15, 1889. Una profanación, a profanation, written to condemn the friar's denial to give his brother-in-law Mariano Herbosa a Christian burial. Verdades nuevas, new truths, addressed Vicente Beyoc Sanchez's claims that allowing reforms would lead to the dismantling of the friar's peaceful rule in the Philippines, published on July 31, 1889. Crueldad, cruelty, written in defense of his friend Blumentritt against insults and defamatory statements by Blumentritt's enemies, published on August 15, 1889. Diferencias, differences. This was a reply to an article published in the La Patria, which poked fun at the Filipinos for asking the Spanish government for reforms, published on September 14, 1889. Inconsecuencias, inconveniences, was written to defend Antonio Luna against Pablo Mirdea's attacks, published on November 30, 1889. Llanto y risas, tears and laughters. Rizal condemned the preconceived notions that the Spaniards held for Filipinos on the basis of their race, published on November 30, 1889. Ingratitudes, ingratitude, written in response to Governor General Wayner's comments to those in Calamba, telling them not to hang on to their ungrateful children's promises. Criticism of Filipinos' passion for gambling. Juan Luna and Valentin Ventura informed Rizal of the Filipinos in Madrid who have become addicted to gambling. He then asked Marcelo del Pilar to deliver a letter in which he reminded the expatriates of what prompted them to move to Europe in the first place. Disturbing news from home. Rizal learned that his family was in danger of being evicted from their home because of the worsening of the agrarian problem. The rental fee in the Dominican hacienda had increased, and the tenants, including Rizal's family, who could not afford it, would have to be evicted. Another distressing piece of information he received was that of Pasiano, Antonio Lopez, and Silvestre Ubaldo's deportation to Mindoro. Another brother-in-law, Manuel T. Hidalgo, was deported to Bohol for the second time. The premonition of Rizal. Upon receiving such news, Rizal had difficulty sleeping and had frequent thoughts of death, and wished to finish el filibusterismo before dying. The plan to return to the Philippines. Rizal became anxious and wanted to return home to aid his family, which horrified his friends and fellow expatriates as he was being targeted by the friars back home. Thankfully, Pasiano changed his brother's mind by raising their family's case to Audiencia Real Madrid. Rizal then moved to Madrid to handle the case. To my muse. The poem Amimusa was written and dedicated to the Philippines. In it, Rizal expressed his dissatisfaction with the country, his muse, and bids her goodbye. But he asks her to come back and give him faith, vigor, and glory. Rizal's affair with Suzanne Jacobi. Rizal had an affair with Suzanne Jacobi, the niece of his landlord. When Rizal left Belgium to move to Madrid, Suzanne was obviously overcome with grief, as could be seen in her undated letter to Rizal, in which she expressed her sadness that he has left her and that she hopes that he would come back someday and take her with him.